As a former superintendent, Tom Vander Ark understands the importance of building a quality team. His most recent book, Smart Cities That Work for Everyone, dives into how cities and schools across the country think differently about recruiting and talent development. Tom recently sat down with Getting Smart team member Megan Mead to talk about why talent matters.
So today we're talking talent and talent development. Tom, you've written a lot about this. The recent Smart Cities book, there's an entire chapter on talent development.
Chapter 6.
Chapter 6. So tell us why it matters. Why does talent matter?
In education, talent makes a big difference. That's one of the big lessons of the last 20 years. I think the two most important things that have happened in the last 20 years, one is new school development. Foundations really got behind new school development. Probably 10,000 new schools have been developed in the last 20 years. And in many cases, that was accompanied by new and better, more focused efforts to prepare teachers and leaders. And I think we also have seen a lot of studies that have indicated that there's really nothing more important than the quality and the effectiveness of a classroom teacher. So talent matters a lot.
And as we see this kind of new focus on talent development, how have you seen people do it? How are schools and school leaders really identifying teacher talent?
So the big controversial effort in this regard is using test scores to measure talent, tying test scores to teachers, using them as part of the evaluation. And it's certainly important to use the data that we have, but state test scores are sort of a bad and late indicator. If we use them, they ought to be part of a broad dashboard. They ought to be augmented by lots of observations and the observations of many different people. I'm a big fan of Summit Public Schools that uses a really broad dashboard that includes feedback from peers, from parents, from students, and observations, as well as student performance data. So a broad set of indicators ought to help us identify top teacher talent.
And then does that also shift what professional development looks like for teachers as they're, continuing to develop?
Boy, ideally you'd want all of that feedback to feed into an individual development plan. And that development plan ought to feed into a set of online on-demand resources that teachers would have available anytime. It also ought to feed into team resources. So a teacher's working on a team in a supported environment. So a team may have a developmental goal. Then finally, the teacher may be part of a school setting where the school does some school-wide PD. So individual PD, team PD, school-wide PD, and you would hope all of those would be informed by this feedback.
And it'd really be competency-based, right? I mean, it's much more focused on the individual path for teachers.
So that's really the big advance that we're just seeing the beginning of, right? We both for kids and teachers, we're moving away from butts in seats to actual progress based on development. And our friends at the Next Generation Learning Challenge, we've written together about a lot of those schools. Those schools think about next gen learning as blended and personalized and competency-based. And what you and I both tell people is that's what learning should look like for teachers. It should be blended, meaning a mixture of online and face-to-face, and it ought to be highly personalized, so your experience is different than mine. And it ought to be competency-based, meaning really show what you know and progress as you demonstrate mastery.
And I would imagine with the new focus on teacher development, but also a more competency-based model, you get new roles for teachers as well. What do you see kind of the key roles being for teachers, and what shifts do we see towards more roles?
So I think there's two new sets of developmental opportunities for teachers. One is projects, so these are temporary roles, and two are new teacher leadership roles. One thing we know about blended schools is they create and require new leadership roles for teachers. our friends at Public Impact have written at about opportunityculture.org about the many new ways to leverage teacher talent with technology. One of those is a multi-classroom teacher leader. So this might be a teacher that takes a grade span, let's say grades 3 and 4, and becomes that team lead. So they may get a partial release to lead a team of teachers and really provide a lot more facilitation around the curriculum and instruction, but also feedback around what's working and what's not in a classroom. So that multi-classroom leadership is an example of a new role that would give a teacher some early supervision responsibility. In the old days, you jump from teacher to AP and never having supervised other people. Right. And then you deal with student discipline for 2 years and Shazam, you're a principal. Right. And so you've never had the opportunity to lead an instructional team and to supervise people. So giving teachers these intermediate roles and opportunities to lead teams is really important. The second opportunity is that this shift to blended and personalized and competency-based environments is really complicated, and it involves many phases and multiple projects. And so giving teachers that are identified as potential leaders the opportunity to lead these projects is such a great developmental opportunity, right? They can stay in the classroom, but they can provide leadership for their school or for their district around a particular strand. That might be technology, it might be curriculum development, it might be professional development, but giving them an important time-bound role leading a project with really specific deliverables can be both a great developmental opportunity for them, and it gives the district a chance to see that teacher performing in a very new setting.
While also giving them the deeper learning experience, right? I mean, we want so badly for our kids to have these deeper learning experiences, but we want those for educators too. We recently released Preparing Leaders for Deeper Learning. And I think that's, too, just a good resource in everyone needs to be prepared for these deeper learning experiences.
So this is an important paper. It's the sequel to the paper we wrote a year ago, Preparing Teachers for Deeper Learning. And that really argues, it's Karen Cater's argument from Digital Promise. She argues that there ought to be a competency map of what teachers and leaders should know and be able to do. 2, there should be many different ways to learn. And 3, there should be multiple opportunities to demonstrate competence that to progress based on mastery.
So, and with all these changes, do you think we're going to see a different model of salary or a different model of advancement for teachers? Are we going to get rid of kind of the age-old, you've been here for 5 years, you have a master's degree, here's what you get paid?
So the exciting thing is I think we can imagine a new employment bargain, right? Instead of a lousy starting salary, and if you stick around for 20 years and get a master's degree, you can make 70 grand, right? The sort of 30 to 70. I think now we can imagine starting salaries being more like 40,000, and for teachers that are interested in more responsibility and demonstrate real effectiveness, they should be able to move into these project leadership roles or multi-classroom leadership roles much more quickly. And so you can imagine higher starting salaries and then moving more rapidly through the system. And for those that are interested, probably year-long contracts. You can, in all of those ways, go to 40 to 80 in 5 or 7 years instead of 20 years in small steps.
And let's talk class size for a minute. So does this, as we look at different roles for teachers and a different advancement plan, does this mean that a teacher could successfully have higher number of students? And, is small classes the only answer, or does this challenge that a little bit?
Yeah, so we've thought about learning looking quite uniform, classroom to classroom across the district, and we've written employment bargains and budget models all based on this sort of uniform staffing. And blended and competency-based learning means every student is on their own learning progression, and it probably means that they'll spend some time working independently and individually. sometime working in a team, maybe a project team, sometime in a larger, maybe a Socratic seminar, presenting to a larger group. So many different types of settings. And so what that means for teachers is that it will frequently buy them the opportunity to work with a small group, right? So they, on paper, they may be taking on a class size of 35, but because students are often working independently and in groups, teachers may be spending the majority of their time working with individual students and small groups, right? So on paper, it's a class size of 35, but these new staffing models and probably a few more paraprofessionals can mean that teachers spend much more of their time in these new models working with very small groups. So the aggregate class size average becomes much less important than how much time as a teacher do I get to spend with individual students and small groups where I know I can make a difference.
And where those small groups are really determined based on specific things. So I know that I'm teaching a set of kids that all need to be learning what I'm teaching at the right time.
So this is why when we're on the road together, you always see me talking about newclassrooms.org,
right,
and their Teach to One model. The thing that I love about that is while it's a blended model, the coolest station is the small group instruction.
Absolutely.
And the cool thing about it is that it creates the condition where an individual teacher has about 8 students that have all demonstrated readiness for that lesson on that day in that modality. And that's magic. That's dynamic scheduling and predictive algorithm creating really productive conditions for teaching. And that's what teachers should expect from us, from the sector. Those kinds of solutions that make them much more productive.
So kind of last thing to just wrap the conversation into some logistics. What does this mean for HR departments? What's going to change there?
Big implications, right? It first of all suggests they have to be much more data driven. So they need much better human resource information systems. And unfortunately, none on the market are very good. So this is a supply and a demand problem. 2 is they're going to need to work with their superintendent and their school supervisors in building a system of tiered support where schools can earn autonomy in terms of staffing and hiring, and where HR professionals can really focus their attention on struggling schools that really need more assistance. So being able to target assistance to schools that need it most. And the third implication is school coaching, that HR departments are going to have to become blended learning experts. They're going to have to study models like opportunityculture.org so that they really know the different staffing options available to principals so that they can be an expert coach. I'd probably add agreement crafting is another term that I'd like to talk about. What I mean by that is I think education leaders need to be conversation leaders. They need to frame conversations with the community and with their staff about these new changes to blended and personalized and competency-based learning. And they need to craft these temporary agreements that keep the district moving. So particular to HR means really thinking about agreements with employee groups in a much more dynamic way. So that instead of these, every 3 years you have a big contract blow up, it's really a very dynamic problem solving, design thinking, ongoing conversation that's much more a series of small, discrete agreements rather than these really big, 3 to 5 year bargains.
And, that's another thing. Change is hard, especially when you've been a teacher for 20 years, 30 years, and you've got teachers just coming out of universities. So that idea of really helping people understand what's happening, but also fostering those relationships. I mean, besides just sharing information and constantly keeping people aware of things, what else can schools do to really help this process? So bottom line is HR departments have to have much better customer service. Many of them we see in a compliance role and sort of cracking the whip on principals and teachers for following the rules. And I think
we need to flip that on its head, and HR departments need to become much more customer focused. One of their goals has to be improving the culture by improving the service that they provide. So being really customer focused, thinking about the teacher experience and everything that they can do to improve the teaching experience, from candidate identification through the hiring process, through induction, through evaluation, and then providing support and professional development. Being super customer focused, I think will make a big difference.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I think it was really exciting. I think you and I can both agree that teacher development and talent development is going to move the needle forward.
Talent matters.
Talent matters.
Thanks, Megan.
Thank you.
For more on developing talent, go to gettingsmart.com and check out our newly released white paper, Preparing Leaders for Deeper Learning. For episode 4 of the Getting Smart podcast, this is Caroline signing off.